I'm a freelance journalist based in Sana'a, the capital of Yemen. I'm also working as the Times Yemen correspondent, but I also string for various other publications, including the Irish Times, the LA Times. I do a bit of work for USA Today, and various other sort of publications in between. And yes, I was an undergraduate here studying journalism until last year. I've graduated in sort of the last summer. I then I was very fortunate to get on the internship programme at Bloomberg here in London, and I did 3 months there. But I rapidly realised, and although I knew beforehand, that working in an office in London wasn't really for me. I'd already thought about going to Yemen back in 2009 when I was still doing my journalism degree here at City, as it was a kind of growing story beyond Afghanistan, Pakistan and sort of Somalia. It was at the forefront of the so-called war on terror and for security issues. It was also a place where I knew there would be an opportunity for me to improve my Arabic, which I'd been studying as well alongside my degree here at City, and was quite a cheap place to live, not too many journalists. Other than getting in there in the first place, that was obviously an issue, but it was a place that really interested me. And then, of course, the Arab Spring happened and everything got pretty hectic quite quickly. I arrived in Yemen in October last year, about 10 days before the parcel bomb incident. Then there was sort of WikiLeaks, which had a lot of revelations related to Yemen. And then, of course, come January, all the protests started in Yemen have been ongoing ever since.
And how difficult is it to report from Yemen dealing with the security forces and things?
As I mentioned, getting in there in the first place is always the catch. There were sort of 6 or 7 freelance journalists when the uprising first started. 3 of them were deported overnight, literally in one morning in March, and that kind of halved our numbers. After that, obviously, the rest of us that were still left became particularly paranoid, particularly wary of being caught by the security forces. Yemen, unlike sort of Syria or Libya, they're unlikely to detain you, but they'll just deport you. They'll just kick you out of the country if you upset them or you write something that they may not like. So yes, it can be very difficult trying to report from there. Obviously, there's a worry about self-censorship. And then when the unrest began, it's actually covering those protests. Anybody with a camera was sort of targeted by the political security, would approach you on the street. I had colleagues that were literally held at gunpoint by political security when they were seen carrying cameras. But the foreign reporters actually have it pretty easy compared to the local Yemeni journalists. They're the ones that do get taken to prison. They do get beaten up. They do get harassed on a regular basis. There's of the 5 journalists that have been killed in the last 8 months in Yemen, all of them are Yemeni journalists. So yes, the Ministry of Information there and the regime in general generally see journalists as something of a threat. And this is something that it's a kind of balance you have to try and make, is trying to have access to the government in order to be able to get information and do interviews with senior government officials, ministers, or even the president himself, and also trying to cover the story of the protests and not get yourself kicked out of the country.
So how do you cope with this constant threat of having to look over your shoulder all the time?
I have been through brief periods of being paranoid, particularly after those guys I say got deported, but you learn to live with it. You don't sort of lie awake at night, you know, wondering if somebody's going to come knocking at your door. I think I did go through a period of a couple of weeks where that did happen, and I did have to shift where I was living on several occasions over a period of a few months. Did have to leg it in the middle of the night to a different house, but you can't really live like that on a permanent basis, not for months on end, because you'll be a gibbering wreck. So you just have to get on with it the best you can. You write your stories, and I have to say writing for the Times probably helps a lot because it's behind a paywall. And that means that what I write is often not read by the government. The Yemeni government not choosing to pay to read the Times. It's probably a bit of a bonus for me, and I know that's also helped journalists in Libya in similar situations where journalists have been deported, but particularly from the Times, it's almost been a help having that paywall. But it's always a risk, yeah.
When you first started in Yemen, did you think, oh, all my City training had to be thrown out the window, or what was stuck in your mind as the most resounding fact that you had to remember?
I don't know about the resounding facts, but yeah, certainly a lot of the things that that you sit in the classroom and learn about here do have a practical application. You go through your international news classes and you're taught about the relationship between the state and the media that we've already discussed, about the limitations on showing the brutality of war. And sort of injuries that people sustain and what you can and can't show, ethical elements of dealing with people who are grieving over, the loss of relatives and even children and whatever, and how you approach sort of interviewing people like that. And it's kind of, there are a lot of things that you'll probably sit here when you're learning thinking, is this really going to help me? But yeah, I think certainly the ethics side of it, some of the practical applications again about what makes a news story, and how if you're frustrated about not being able to get your story out to get it covered, you've got to find another way, and that's where the skill comes in. It's trying to find an angle to that story or a different element to it that will capture editors back in London or America or wherever that may be. So yeah, there's also, as we know, as anybody who does a journalism course knows now, it's not just about writing and then video and then tweeting. You've got to be able to do all of these things. It's all about a one-man band journalism. When you're out there, particularly in a country with few journalists, you've got to be able to take video, you've got to be able to do audio reports, you've got to be able to write. And sometimes you've got to do all of those things at once. So yeah, now, forget the days of old foreign correspondents filing their copy, sitting by the pool and putting their feet up. Particularly in the situation of the Arab Spring when news is happening fast, and there are a lot of people that literally are after your blood trying to get information. And as a freelancer, you're sometimes running absolutely flat out for days on end, and then it might go quiet. So yes, as a freelancer, you're trying to work as hard as you can, doing all of those things. You feel like you're becoming a bit like an octopus, but you have to be able to do all of those things in order to keep pace with things.